everybody, I'm Rashad Salamat. This is Al Jazeera coming to you live from Doha with our ongoing coverage of developments out of Iran, the United States and Lebanon. Coming up.
The president has decided to dispatch Special Envoy Witkoff and Jared Kushner back to Islamabad. The Iranians want to talk.
U.S. representatives prepare to depart for Pakistan and a possible resumption of negotiations.
Sure they do. Everyone welcome.
Iran's foreign minister is already en route to Islamabad. Iran says it's part of a regional tour.
The choice is theirs, but with this blockade, the clock is not on their side.
The U.S. Defense Secretary says Tehran has limited time to make a deal, and the naval blockade will remain.
All bluster, no balls.
Israel continues to violate the ceasefire in Lebanon. Hezbollah calls the extension meaningless and presses the Lebanese government to withdraw from talks.
And grabbing the nuclear dust, can the U.S. seize Iran's highly enriched uranium? More
Not
on
likely.
the dilemma facing Donald Trump on This Is America.
Oh.
We begin with this flurry of diplomatic activity which is underway as Pakistan looks set to hold a second round of talks between US and Iranian delegates to try to bring about an end to the ongoing conflict. Now, this is what we know so far. The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has confirmed that US Special Envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will travel to Istanbul, or should I say Islamabad,
no couch fucker?
on Saturday.
Where's the couch
for direct
fucker?
talks with Iranian representatives.
The president has decided to dispatch Special Envoy Witkoff and Jared Kushner back to Islamabad. The Iranians want to talk. They want to talk in person, and so the president is, as I've said many times to all of you, always willing to give diplomacy a chance. So Steve and Jared will be heading to Pakistan tomorrow to hear the Iranians out.
Why Jared? Jared is not a part of the administration.
Developments will come from this meeting, and we will see.
Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is already on his way to Islamabad and is expected to arrive shortly. Iran says it's part of a regional tour that includes Russia and Oman. Earlier, at a Pentagon briefing, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the blockade on Iranian ports is being enforced without hesitation or apology. He said Washington had ordered 34 ships to turn around since the blockade began.
Iran has an important choice, a chance to make a deal, a good deal, a wise deal. As part of that effort, the United States has imposed an ironclad blockade that grows more
Good job,
powerful
dumbass.
by the day. From the Gulf of Oman to the open ocean, we have all the time in the world.
Do we?
And we're not anxious for a deal.
Well, we are live in Tehran,
Think you're full of shit.
Islamabad, and the White House, where we begin with Mike Hanna. Mike, we've got Witkoff and Kushner being sent back to Islamabad. Now, what more do we know?
Well, this announcement came somewhat out of the blue. It came suddenly from the White House press secretary, who said that
on a Friday afternoon before the market's closed.
Back to the region
Interesting.
For negotiations. Now, it would
Very
appear
interesting.
that these are more exploratory than were that failed round that occurred before in Islamabad. The reason for this is that the Vice President J.D. Vance, who led the delegation last time, is remaining in Washington. But it is added that he and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, will be prepared to travel to Islamabad immediately should the envoys report back there's the need to move to a more substantive rather than exploratory level of talk. So it appears that the White House is keeping all its options open. It appears that they will
but have the Iranians agreed to any of this?
Hence, there may be a protocol issue involved here. But the fact that they are sending these two envoys who have negotiated with the Iranians indirectly and directly before appears to that the White House has a hope that there could be some change in the Iranian posture. And the White House press secretary saying that they had indications in recent days of a shift in the Iranian position and a more amenable movement towards the possibility of talks and eventually some kind of settlement. So there we have two envoys on their way. They will report back to the White House, and if there is progress, it will be decided to send the Vice President and the Secretary of State to join the delegation.
Mike, thank you. Mike Hanna, live for us there in Washington at the White House. Now, Osama bin Javed is in the Pakistani capital, Islamabad. And Osama, it looks like we're going to have a second round of talks. What are your Pakistani sources telling you?
Well, it has been a flurry of activity in a fast-moving news day where we first heard from the Iranians that there is a phone call between the Iranian foreign minister and his Pakistani counterpart. There's also been another phone call between the Iranian foreign minister and the Pakistani military chief. There's also been a phone call between the Pakistani foreign minister and his Russian counterpart. There are going to be a number of meetings that are going to take place tonight as Abbas Araghchi's plane is due to land in a matter of minutes in Islamabad. We're expecting that this is going to be a short session where after that he has announced that he's going to be moving to other countries, including Oman and Russia. So it is going to be an interesting balancing act for the Pakistanis because they, as I've been speaking to sources, they've told me that their lines of communication have been open. The sticking point remains the control over Strait of Hormuz. The headway is that previously the Iranians had said they will not negotiate with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, especially after Geneva happened.
I don't blame them.
And right in the middle of the talks, America and Israel decided to attack Iran. But there is a lot of moving parts to this story. We still do not have confirmation.
So we're just giving up on the nuclear stuff?
To be a second round, but the
It's all about the
Pakistanis
Strait?
are quite hopeful that this is going to happen. It is going to happen in Islamabad, and they're going to be able to bring these sides together. Remember, it is not just Pakistan. It is all of its regional allies, as well as the help of China, as well as Russia. So I just spoke to the Pakistani information minister, and I asked him, how much hope does he have? And he said, as mediators, they have not stopped short of pulling anything that they can to bring an end to the conflict, lasting peace, and they're going to continue to have hope as long as these contacts continue.
Osama, thank you. Osama bin Javed, live for us there in Islamabad. Well, let's go from there to Tehran, where Ali Hashim is live for us. And Ali, this looks like a serious resumption of talks. What are Iranian officials saying about Abbas Araghchi's visit? And really, are they saying that they are really going to be talking here, or is it sort of being portrayed as being coincidental almost?
Well, I asked directly a senior Iranian official on whether there's going to be U.S.-Iran talks, and he said no, there are going to be no U.S.-Iran talks in Pakistan. This was clear. It was this way. So this is at least what we're hearing. Abbas Araghchi said in a tweet that he's going to Islamabad, he's going to Muscat, he's going to Moscow.
Jesus Christ.
And these visits are meant mainly to discuss with regional neighbors the developments, and of course what we also understood from our sources is that there are ideas that are being pushed forward by the Russians, the Omanis, and at the same time, with respect to the
Trump is a
Iranians,
joke.
they have their own understanding, or let me say their own vision of how this dilemma could be solved, how this deadlock could be break. And at the same time, for them, they want to end this situation, to end the war. And that's why they're ready to coordinate and to talk to the Pakistanis, of course, the Russians, the Omanis. But for the moment, it doesn't seem that the Iranians in any way, at least this is what they're saying. Now, what could happen in Pakistan, that's another issue. What sources are telling us, they're not meeting the Americans.
Ali, thank you. Ali Hashim there live in Tehran. So, what it looks like we're on the cusp of a second round of talks. President Trump said he's in no hurry to end the conflict with Iran. Let's have a closer look at the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. Tensions between the US and Iran remain high in the crucial waterway, as Kulsum Sharif now explains.
There's a severe maritime crisis here at the Strait of Hormuz, while it's effectively closed
Absolute
because
joke.
of two blockades in place, one by Iran and the other by US. There's intense activity around its waters here, be it in the Gulf of Oman, the Arabian Sea, or further down in the Indian Ocean. Now, this video shows US forces boarding and seizing a vessel in the Indian Ocean. The military says the sanctioned ship was transporting Iranian oil. Now, Central Command says that it's ordered 33 vessels back to port in the first week after it imposed a blockade here on April 13. targeting maritime trade, entering and leaving Iranian ports. In retaliation, we've had Iran's Revolutionary Guard firing and seizing multiple commercial vessels this week, saying the strait is not fully open until the U.S. blockade on its ports is lifted. But President Donald Trump has ordered the military to maintain a strict blockade of the southern ports here. He says he's ordered to shoot and kill any small boats that are caught planting sea mines in the Strait of Hormuz.
A little late, the
There's
mines are already
also an
there, and there's so
intense
many,
buildup
the
of
Iranians
US
forgot where they put them.
air and naval power in the region, the most intense since 2003. 3 aircraft carrier strike groups, including destroyers and amphibious units, have been deployed near Iran. This is war diplomacy, Trump style, from a blockade, a naval buildup, alongside a ceasefire and negotiations for a deal. But none of it has been able to reopen the strait that has been effectively closed since the start of the war. And while the confrontation is playing out in the Gulf, the impact has been on soaring prices of crude oil, natural gas, and other commodities.
Well, we can speak now to General Mark Kimmett. He is a retired U.S. general and a former Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. General, it seems like this has really come out of left field, but then we've got Tehran saying there are no talks taking place, but surely you wouldn't be sending Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff to Islamabad unless they were.
Yeah, there's clear,
Sure you would if you're
some
stupid
level of communication
and
going on
insane.
between the United States and Tehran. But we may have the same problem that we've had before. We may be talking to the wrong people. We may be getting the wrong power bases. So in many ways, I think the constant denials and the travel schedules are so confusing. That may be one of the reasons they're not sending the vice president, but they're only sending Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. It'd be very, very embarrassing for the vice president of the United States to be in Islamabad and nobody shows
It's already
up.
embarrassing.
Yeah, the other thing is the Iranians did say they didn't want to talk to Witkoff and Kushner last time, but they would prefer to talk to somebody like J.D. Vance. But so what do you make of that?
Well, 2 things. There's no doubt about the protocol level. You would not send the vice president to talk to the deputy foreign minister. You have to get the protocol right. But again, it may be this whole issue that when you say the Iranians, may be the mistake that we're making. The fact is, we have found out through the military campaign that they're not the Iranians. They're different groups of Iranians. And so I just hope we're talking to the right Iranians that will be guarantee that whoever is going to show up is of equal ranking of Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff.
Now, what about...
So they have to go into a dumpster to find a couple of guys?
It seems though they'd reached an impasse with regards, and diplomacy may now be seen as the only way forward. But then you've got a third carrier group into the Gulf of Oman when the U.S. military already has overwhelming superiority.
Well, you use the term impasse. I would use the term pause. It is obvious that we're getting the chessboard set up. The third carrier group has been planned to be brought in for quite some time now. It really relieves the pressure on those other 2 aircraft carriers that have been conducting constant operations. And that also gives us the ability to bring 90+ more aircraft into the fight if that's what's required.
General, have the Iranians and the U.S. been taking this time while there's been this so-called ceasefire to really regroup militarily and otherwise?
They'd be foolish if they weren't.
So in what way would the Iranians be regrouping?
We have strong indications that the Iranians are getting resupplied by other countries, their defensive missiles, their offensive missiles, other capabilities. It's always important to get new intelligence. So I'd say that while it's fairly overt how the Americans would resupply themselves, it's a little more covert how the Iranians would resupply themselves.
Now, the Strait of Hormuz is the fulcrum of what is happening right here. And what could be used to entice the Iranians to perhaps get rid of their claim to sovereignty over the waterway?
Well, first of all, the world dismisses the claim of Iran having sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. But it's
I
clearly
don't think they care what the world
$20 billion
claims.
frozen asset capability is a lot of money that could be used to, as you say, induce the Iranians to open it up.
Now, what about...
So a pallet of cash?
the GCC countries in all this? You know, how are they looking at what is going on right now, having taken quite a lot of damage from Iranian missiles and drones?
Yeah, I think more than anything else, the GCC countries don't want to see a repeat of the war that started on February 28th. I think that, in fact, is one of the reasons why the Americans are bringing in alternative assets like aircraft carriers, so it can be made very, very clear that the Gulf countries are non-belligerents in this war.
Now, one of the demands that Iran will naturally make would be a lifting of sanctions with regards to the whole plethora of maximalist conditions put forward. Now, if that was acceded to, is it something then the third party here involved, which we haven't mentioned so far, Israel, would say categorically no to?
Depends on the deal that was made to release those sanctions. If, in fact, those sanctions were released as part of a grand deal that included limitations on the Iranian nuclear programs, I think the Israelis would be supportive of that, or would not be unsupportive of that.
General, thank you very much indeed. General Mark Kimmett there, former Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. Now, Arab foreign ministers and officials have attended the final day of an EU summit in Cyprus to discuss the Iran war crisis. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says any US-Iran deal must include Tehran's ballistic missiles and nuclear capabilities.
Our shared goal is now to negotiate a lasting end to the war, and this includes restoring full and permanent freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz without tolls. It is equally clear that any peace agreement will have to address Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program. The events of the last 7 weeks have shown the real danger that a nuclear Iran would pose to the world.
Abbas Aslani is a senior research fellow at the Tehran-based Center for Middle East Strategic Studies, and he joins us now indeed from the Iranian capital. Abbas, thank you so much for joining us. What message do you think Abbas Araghchi will be taking with him to Islamabad from Tehran?
Well, Rishad, I think Iranian foreign minister who has just reportedly arrived in Islamabad is going to somehow review what has been exchanged through Pakistanis with the United States, and he is going to somehow update the Pakistani officials on the latest, considerations or views from the Iranian side, as well as to hear from them on the American, let's say, messages to the Pakistani side. We have been hearing some reports from the American side that they might join the talks, but there's nothing about that from the Iranian, let's say, side. And this is going to be one stop and one leg of his regional tour, and his next stop is going to be Muscat as well as Moscow. And this indicates, as I was talking to sources, they were saying that Iran is going to follow up on its initiatives that was previously proposed through Pakistan to the United States. For Tehran, what remains at the table is that 10-point plan, which was somehow previously agreed through Islamabad, and they are going to somehow follow up on those issues, and I think try to see what is the latest in terms of the negotiations, as well as the fragile ceasefire, which is now in place, but it is at stake as well. Now,
Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner would not be heading to Islamabad tomorrow unless there were going to be talks. But why is there a denial
Yes, they would,
from Tehran that any
because
negotiations are taking
Trump's
place?
an idiot.
Well,
I bet you as soon as the markets close, this trip gets called off.
The Iranian foreign minister is now heading to is in Islamabad and then heading to Oman and Moscow as the foreign minister. And this is not the negotiating team or delegation. For sure, they are going to touch upon those issues related to the talks with the United States. But this is not part of, let's say, those direct talks with the United States. It seems that the American side wants to somehow spin it as a second round of negotiations with the United States, as they have said that Tehran requested for this. But what is real and what we have been hearing or witnessing in the past few days is that Tehran has said that by the time that the U.S. naval blockade is in place, which Iran considers as violation of the ceasefire agreement, Iranian delegation will not appear in Islamabad for direct talks with the United States. That's the reason, and it's clear. And I think by the time that it's not the case, Iranian negotiators are not likely to engage in direct talks with the U.S. officials, and maybe U.S. Negotiators might be in Pakistan to meet with Pakistani officials. Also, like what Iranian foreign minister is doing in Islamabad, they might be doing the same if they appear in Islamabad. And as we hear so far, there is nothing planned as, let's say, in-person meeting between the Iranian officials and the American ones.
Abbas, one of the major complaints from the Iranian side has been there's a huge level of mistrust amongst the Americans, and one can understand that, given the previous negotiations, including the ones on February the 27th, slated for the 29th, when the war did kick off with that bombing by Israel and the US in the middle of those talks. Now, what can the US do in order to build confidence, and what would be confidence-building measures for Tehran?
Well, Rishad, as you said, the trust deficit as well as uncertainty which has been clouding the atmosphere is the most important element, which is somehow making the progress not to happen in this process. But what can happen is the trust-building measures that can be taken in order to make Iran to believe that the United States is genuinely seeking a deal with Iran. And this can, as Iranian parliament speaker previously said, take place on a step-by-step process, because Iran is, hesitation about, implementing its obligations in a likely or potential agreement cannot be accepted, because the U.S. might, change and shift its position in relation to the agreement. Specifically, this has been the case under Trump administration on a daily basis. They say different things. So I think the best would be to engage in trust-building measures and steps, and in a step-by-step process. But what we're seeing in practice and in the field contradicts this. And those actions conducted by the United States, including the naval blockade, seizure of Iranian tankers, or additional sanctions and other measures like intensifying their military presence in the region, does not align with this, let's say, prospect.
Abbas Aslani, thank you very much indeed. Abbas Aslani from the Center for Middle East Strategic Studies, joining us live from Tehran. Hezbollah says a ceasefire in Lebanon is meaningless given the continuing attacks by Israel. The Iranian allied group insists diplomacy between Beirut and Israel is an insult to Lebanon. Earlier, Israeli planes struck the village of Deir Amez in southern Lebanon. The military said Hezbollah had been operating from there. President Trump announced a 3-week extension to the ceasefire on Thursday. Well, inside Lebanon, deep divisions remain on how to negotiate with Israel and the United States. Zaina Khoda reports from the capital, Beirut.
South Lebanon is still an active battleground, where Israel continues sporadic attacks against what it calls Hezbollah targets.
The
group
ceasefire?
which initially held fire is now responding. Hezbollah says it won't accept a one-sided truce. It's now been extended for 3 weeks, but there is no commitment to Lebanon's request for an end to Israeli attacks and the demolition of villages across southern Lebanon. It followed a meeting U.S. President Donald Trump chaired between the ambassadors of Israel and Lebanon in Washington. The focus was on Hezbollah as a common problem.
And recognizing that the problem is not Lebanon, and the problem is not Israel. The problem is Hezbollah, the bad little kid throwing rocks. That's what the president is getting launched today, to get that little kid
This fucking lunatic.
out of the neighborhood.
Entire fucking
There was also
administration
talk
filled with
about making
stupid.
peace.
Give me a
We're going to
break.
keep going, working for a peace that hopefully we'll get it as soon as possible.
Hezbollah, which has pledged to fight until its last breath, is not the only party against the government's decision to engage in talks with Israel. Powerful politicians believe any deal should only involve a permanent cessation of hostilities and a full Israeli withdrawal from Lebanese land. Among them, Speaker of Parliament Nabih Berri, who, like Hezbollah, represents the Shia Muslim community, which has been bearing the brunt of Israel's attacks, with many feeling targeted not just by Israel, but by a leadership they say is advancing Israel and U.S. interests. Trump says the U.S. is going to work with Lebanon to help it protect itself from Hezbollah, and he looks forward to hosting the Prime Minister of Israel and Lebanon's president in the near future.
Those statements will worsen tensions in the country. Also, the president and prime minister don't appear to have regional backing for what is seen as moving too quickly outside the framework of the Arab Peace Initiative anchored by Saudi Arabia. The kingdom, which has influence here, sent an envoy for talks with a divided political class.
A ceasefire has stopped the intense Israeli bombing campaign, but people still can't return to their homes. The south of the country is occupied, and pressure to disarm Hezbollah without its cooperation is a recipe for, at the least, internal instability. Zana Khuder, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
Let's bring you some of the other news now. And at least 10 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli attacks across Gaza. Local authorities say Israeli warplanes targeted a police patrol in Gaza City, killing 3 people and injuring several others. The Israeli military confirmed they had conducted a strike in the area, but said they were targeting, quote, Hamas fighters. And in separate attacks, tank shelling killed 2 in Beit Lahia, while a strike in Khan Yunis in the south killed 5. The funeral of a 15-year-old Palestinian killed by Israeli forces is being held in the occupied West Bank village of Tel. Yusuf Shtayeh was shot by Israeli forces on Friday during a raid in Nablus. He is at least the 4th Palestinian killed by Israeli settlers or soldiers this week. Rights groups are increasingly warning about worsening violence on the occupied West Bank. Iraq is entering a pivotal political moment as the process to appoint a new prime minister moves forward. Behind closed doors, rival domestic factions and foreign actors are hoping to influence the outcome. The decision will have consequences that extend well beyond Baghdad. Mahmoud Abdulwahid reports on the growing stakes.
The race to nominate Iraq's next prime minister has stalled. Under the constitution, after a president is elected, the largest bloc in parliament has 15 days to select a prime minister. That gives them until April 26.
Right? His poll numbers are like Carter's.
Has been derailed by internal divisions. At the heart of the deadlock is the coordination framework, a powerful Shia alliance. It's facing growing internal disagreement and mounting external pressure. Among the leading contenders is incumbent Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, but his factional opponents are backing former Premier Nouri al-Maliki, who has close ties to Tehran. The debate intensified recently after IRGC Commander Ismail Qa'ani visited Baghdad and held talks with senior Iraqi leaders. For Iran, allied parties and armed groups in Iraq remain a cornerstone of its regional influence. The United States, meanwhile, is pushing for a government with reduced influence from Iran-aligned factions. Donald Trump has warned
He was a good man.
revoke support for Baghdad if Maliki
Better than the
returns
orange
to
lunatic,
power.
that's for fucking sure.
Beyond Iraq, the regional balance is shifting. The new Syrian government has been turning away from Iran. And in Lebanon, Israel is pushing the government to disarm Hezbollah. Still, Iran insists it retains leverage. Its parliament speaker Mohammad Baqir Qalibaf saying Tehran has new cards to play. All of this is piling the pressure on the Iraqi parliament. For Iraq, the stakes are high. The constitutional clock is ticking. Its pick for the next prime minister could reshape the balance of power in the region as Iran is recalibrating and Washington is pressing Baghdad to elect a government that's detached from Tehran. Mahmoud Abdulwahid, Al Jazeera, Baghdad.
2 of the world's largest tech companies have announced significant job cuts. Meta is laying off about 8,000 employees, or 10% of its workforce, as Microsoft
Who needs
offers
people when you have
buyouts a
AI?
similar number. Meta, which of course owns Instagram and Facebook, says it's making the cuts to ramp up spending on AI infrastructure and highly paid AI expert hires. In a different approach, Microsoft said it was offering voluntary redundancy to 8,750 of its American employees. You are watching Al Jazeera, a reminder of our top stories. The White House has confirmed that U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will travel to Islamabad for a second round of direct talks with Iranian representatives. They're due to land on Saturday. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has arrived in Pakistan as part of those talks. It's his first stop on a regional tour that includes Russia and Oman. Arab foreign ministers and officials have attended the final day of an EU summit in Cyprus to discuss the Iran war crisis. The bloc's foreign policy chief says the freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz is non-negotiable. Well, I'll hand it over now to Al Jazeera's team in Washington, D.C. for our regular segment from the American capital. This is America, bringing you deeper insights into the debates shaping America and the world.
Hello, this
Nixon
is
was
America,
defending
and
Carter.
That is 3 Mile Island.
That is a
here in
different time.
Pennsylvania. Back in 1979, one of its reactors went into partial nuclear meltdown. There were no reported injuries. But would that be the case if Donald Trump succeeds in his mission to extract Iran's enriched uranium? We'll be looking at the risks and the challenges associated with America getting its hands on what Mr. Trump calls Iran's nuclear dust. We'll have more on that
Good
later.
luck.
But first, let's go to Cyril Vanier down in our Washington studio to get us started.
Richard, thank you very much. The U.S. president has offered varying reasons for starting the war against Iran. The country's missiles, regional influence, threats to Israel, even hostility to the U.S. But the one target Donald Trump always returns to, Iran's nuclear capability. Trump wants it gone, one way or another. Now, that could mean reaching an agreement with Tehran, or it could mean further military action. Well, Mike Hanna is at the White House. He'll be breaking down the president's nuclear dilemma. Alex Baird has the science behind the quote-unquote nuclear dust. And John Holman examines the military option.
Trump's brain is dust. Jesus Christ.
First, why does Iran's highly enriched uranium matter so much to the U.S.? Richard Gaisford reports.
I thought it was
from 3 Mile
obliterated.
Island.
By taking the enriched uranium, America says it would stop Iran from building a nuclear weapon. And that is a key red line for the Trump administration.
Because the bottom line remains
This
bottom
fucking
line.
drunk.
Iran
Jesus
will never get a nuclear
Christ.
bomb. The choice is theirs. All they have to do is abandon a nuclear weapon in meaningful and verifiable ways, or instead they can watch their regime's fragile economic state collapse under the unrelenting pressure of American power.
Well, by securing that nuclear dust, as Trump calls it, the Americans really believe that it would stop Iran from threatening not just Israel and the region, but also Washington and the wider world. Well, Iran has consistently denied that it wants to build a nuclear weapon and says its nuclear program is for civilian purposes, and giving it up would stop it from generating electricity. In effect, Iran is saying it wants to do what the US has been doing for decades. Well, this place here in Pennsylvania, 3 Mile Island, opened in the 1970s, and despite a partial nuclear meltdown in 1979, continued to produce electricity until 7 years ago when it was switched off.
Now, the Iranians aren't going to
Tells
agree
a
to give this
story
stuff up,
about the
Jimmy.
importance of nuclear energy in the modern age. It's now being prepared to be reopened to provide electricity for power-hungry data centers that will drive an AI revolution in America. Well, across the country, it's a similar story, with plans to quadruple nuclear output, which currently accounts for about 20% of all
We
the
should have more
electricity
nuclear output.
generated in America. Crucially, despite that desire, the US has a
Yeah, right.
shortage of uranium and imports the vast majority of what it needs from abroad. And up until 2024, that included Russia. And that
Whole bunch of
poses the
drunks in this
question,
administration,
could
Jimmy.
Iran's stockpiles of enriched uranium
Hero,
be useful
Hexeth,
to America?
Cash.
Certainly the US needs nuclear fuel, but that is unlikely to fit the bill. Iran's uranium has been enriched to a much higher grade than is used in US nuclear power stations. Many experts doubt it actually has a civilian use anywhere, and what remains in Iran is more potent in terms of political power. Richard Gaisford, Al Jazeera, 3 Mile Island, Pennsylvania.
Al Jazeera's Mike Hanna is at the White House. Mike, when we talk about the nuclear issue, we're really talking about two separate things. There's Iran's ability to enrich uranium going forward, and separately, the stockpile of highly enriched uranium that they already have. Walk us through the administration's thinking on this.
Yes, indeed. There's also a third factor there, and that is the enrichment of the uranium to weapons grade, which is some 90%, whereas Iran's stockpile, it would appear, is in the region of 60%, the level for peacetime and nuclear power purposes. But the position of the administration is somewhat confused by that of the president. Let's hear what President Trump has to say.
Yeah, because he's confused, because he's stupid.
USA will get all nuclear dust. Do you know what the nuclear dust is?
Oh, my God.
We're taking it. Very simple. The security challenges faced by Israel are enormous, including the threat of Iran's nuclear ambitions, which I've talked a lot about.
So Israel can have nukes, but no one else
One of the
can.
worst deals I've ever seen is the Iran deal.
Well, the question is, what is nuclear dust that President Trump refers to? It is well known that uranium cannot be destroyed in an explosion. It may be buried by those heavy strikes that the U.S. carried out on Iranian nuclear facilities last year that President Trump himself said obliterated Iranian nuclear development. So the question that he is at this stage speaking about nuclear dust, carrying the implication that the enriched uranium was destroyed in those strikes, supporting the position that he has maintained for very months, is a position that actually truly complicates the U.S. position in dealing with it. Are they talking about removing enriched uranium that may be buried, which is an exceedingly problematic program, getting that out, getting it into the United States, at one stage suggesting that they would give enough back to Iran for its peacetime nuclear facilities? So the issue is clouded in doubt, mainly because of an apparent misunderstanding of the president as to what happens to enriched uranium when it gets bombed.
Yeah, Mike Hanna reporting from the White House. Thank you very much. Now, joint military strikes by the U.S. and Israel have dealt a massive blow to Iran's nuclear program. Key facilities across the country have been destroyed or degraded, but the country is still believed to have this highly enriched uranium, about 450 kilos of it, the nuclear dust that Donald Trump refers to. Alex Baird explains.
Trump's referred repeatedly to nuclear dust. He's believed to be referring to Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium. But what does that actually mean? So uranium starts off looking like this, straight out of the ground. But to be useful, the uranium part needs to be separated out from the rock and then converted into a gas. That gas is then put into fast-spinning cylinders called centrifuges. When I say fast, we're talking 1,000 spins per second. That separates it out, the lighter part is collected, and that's the important bit. That is called U-235.
What's up, Charisse?
That process
quit your
has to be
job?
repeated over and
about
over
time.
again until more and more U-235 is separated out. Once the proportion is high enough and you turn it back into a solid, then you have something you can use. Enriched uranium. Once you get to a level between 3 and 5%, now you can start a nuclear power station. And if you keep those centrifuges spinning for years and years, eventually you'll get to 60% enrichment. That's the level that Iran's stockpile is currently at. Once you hit that milestone, the next crucial level only takes a matter of weeks. That level is 90%, weapons grade, and that is enough for a bomb. The UN says Iran has roughly 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. So the fear in Washington and Israel is that Iran could get to weapons grade in just weeks. President Trump's confident his bombing campaign has obliterated Iran's enrichment facilities, burying that nuclear dust under rubble. The question now, what happens to it?
Joining us now in the studio, Daryl Kimball, nuclear non-proliferation specialist and executive director.
You're going to be waiting a
of the Arms
long
Control
time,
Association,
Charisse.
and retired Army colonel and former Pentagon director of Arabian Peninsula Affairs, David DeRoche. Welcome to both of you. Daryl Kimball, do we know for sure where this highly enriched uranium is, the nuclear dust?
Well, according to the IAEA, we know where most of it is. About 200 of the 440
what the circus is doing today?
near the Isfahan nuclear complex.
I mean, you voted for the circus. You voted for the clown. That's what I heard anyway. It's the rumor.
Complex.
You voted for Trump.
And so we have some
He's
idea,
sending Jared
but it's gonna
and
take,
Witkoff to Pakistan for negotiations with Iran tomorrow. But Iran has said there's no negotiations.
By the way, it is uranium hexafluoride gas. That is a Donald Trumpism. And the material is likely in tunnels or could be buried under structures from the previous bombings in what might look like scuba tanks. So it is also a toxic material that has to be handled very carefully.
Trumper. Hey, everybody. Sharice is a Trumper. She's a Trumper. MAGA. Boo.
Uranium enrichment.
David DeRoche, Colonel, should we believe that the U.S. has good intelligence on where this is? I ask you this because the U.S. president has said, look, we've been looking at this highly enriched uranium and where it might be. We've had constant monitoring ever since the U.S. and Israel bombed Iran's nuclear facilities, and especially the mountain in Fordo a year ago. So do we think that they have accurate intelligence?
The question is not whether I think they have an accurate intelligence, whether President Trump and his team thinks they have accurate intelligence. I think they do, but you know, there's always the problem of the possibility of a surprise. You could have I don't think we have a known unknown.
So how's work going today?
Unknown, to put it in Rumsfeldian terms. And but if that is the case, what it would mean is that the Iranian regime has managed to systemically, over an extremely long period of time, hoodwink not just the United States, but also Israel, which has penetrated most of Iran's information, and the IAEA. So it would be a profound multilateral intelligence failure if he's wrong.
So, Darrell Kimball, as a non-proliferation expert, I assume you default to treaties, to negotiations, to agreements when it comes to nuclear matters. I mean, do you think that a raid, because that's what's being considered, or it's one of the tools being considered, do you think a military raid to go and seize uranium could work?
It could work, but it would be extremely risky. I mean, the best way to deal with Iran's uranium, the highly enriched
it's going to get American kids killed.
Also low enriched uranium elsewhere, is to bring the IAEA back in and to downblend it and remove it from Iran, maybe to a third country. That's what was done with the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. I think that's the best.
Nobody should trust you, Sharice.
Must be the first and second option, because a military raid to find the material, to remove it, dispose of it, right now would be done under hostile conditions. And this is an operation that, I mean, according to our sources at the Department of Energy and the Defense Department, it would take weeks. And it is not a sure bet that the United States would find all the material.
Yeah, it is another gorgeous day out.
And so
it's going to get cold here again tomorrow, though.
Also be in question.
You don't trust yourself? Well.
So, you know, I think the United States is best advised to try to negotiate a deal.
You might want to get some therapy for that, Sharice.
Material. Now, Iran has offered to downblend the material, meaning to convert it under IAEA supervision from 60% enriched.
Conservatives do no longer exist, Jimmy.
To bomb grade to 20%.
I mean, some of them exist, but
that would be
the crazies are in charge of the GOP.
Would be to remove it from the country, perhaps to Russia or Kazakhstan for storage or maybe even for sale. So there are options that are available if the two sides are going to work in a serious way to find a win-win solution.
It's interesting you bring up Kazakhstan. We'll bring them up a little later because there's a precedent there that could be of interest to us in the context of this conversation. But I want to make sure our viewers understand what we're talking about when we say that a military operation is under consideration or has been to seize this highly enriched uranium. It would be risky, as we're saying. It would probably leave U.S. forces vulnerable on the ground in Iran for quite a while. Al Jazeera's John Holman got a tactical briefing.
Thanks, Cyril. I've got here with me Jason Campbell. He's a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute, but he's also been the Secretary of Defense's country director for Afghanistan and the NATO Special Operations Analyst. So, Jason, how would it actually work if the United States was going to try and go in and get this highly enriched uranium?
Well, John, this would be an extremely complex operation and come with a very high degree of risk. Fundamentally, you'd want to be near certain as to where the location of the highly enriched uranium is. And in some scenarios, you might be dealing with more than one location, which just exponentially increases the risk because you're now talking about multiple operations, either simultaneously or in very quick succession.
Okay, so where might those locations be?
Well, there are three primary candidates. The first is Isfahan, the second is Natanz, and the third is Fordow. We know from credible open source reporting that the Iranians likely moved their highly enriched uranium to this facility in Isfahan prior to last year's 12-day war.
Okay, so let's take that just to make things a little bit easier for our military planners. If it's Isfahan, what are they going to have to do to go and get it?
Right. Well, the first thing you do before you insert any ground forces would be a series of preemptive strikes against any Iranian military assets in the immediate area, and also try to limit the degree, if not completely blind
Zero
the
class
Iranians
ham.
to this oncoming operation. In an ideal world, you'd have a broader set of strikes around the country to keep Iran's attention off this primary objective. After that, because we know Isfahan was damaged during the 12-day war last year, you're talking about limited accessibility. So that means you have to put in a cordon with ground forces numbering roughly 1,000 or so to keep the area safe. These ground forces are still going to be very vulnerable, so you're going to need near constant air support flying over them to help protect them and have eyes on what's going on in their immediate area. And then things get more complicated.
Okay, so let's assume that all of that's in place. How do they get more complicated? What comes next?
That's right. Well, we know from reporting that the 3 known entrances to the Isfahan facility were damaged in last year's 12-day war and have since been backfilled by the Iranians with soil to make breaching them even more difficult. So now you have to go outside of the military realm and bring in the type of equipment and personnel who can start to dig out a path for the Special Operations Forces trained in breaching these types of facilities to even get in.
So just to check, we're talking about getting in contractors with specialized equipment and telling them you're going to be
Trump's a pig, ham.
Possibly under
Can't
fire,
help himself.
Possibly for some time for some quite radioactive stuff.
Absolutely, and not potentially. You are going to be under fire and under heavy threat while you're in this location.
Okay, so they've dug. Then presumably a specialized US team has gone in once they've cleared the pathway to actually get the uranium. What's the timescale for this?
It's very difficult to say. The U.S. does have special operators that are trained in how to breach some of these facilities. They are trained in how to detect and handle this sensitive material. But what they're going to find when they get down there is too difficult to say. There's maybe damage from last year's bombing. There likely will be some booby traps. So you're talking not hours, you're talking maybe more than a day to get down.
I agree, Charisse.
Never mind bring it out to the surface.
And the overall operation.
I mean, I don't have much of a future left, but
Absolutely.
I worry
This
about
is
my
not a
kids,
quick
my
raid or a quick
granddaughter.
strike. This is an indeterminate
What kind of
amount
country they're
time,
gonna have.
likely more than a week.
Should they?
We got to start
do it,
normalizing
given
this
all of the
country
above?
starting in November.
Considering all these factors, it's very difficult to see this being a feasible option. To flip it around, if I were an IRGC commander, I've prepared for this scenario, and I would look at this as a potential early birthday present because they know exactly what to do, and they will strike at this hard.
Thanks a lot for that, Jason. So
Yeah,
that's Jason
and it's gonna get a lot of
Campbell, and
American
now
kids
it's
killed.
Back to you, Cyril.
So, Colonel DeRoche, the Pentagon presumably has put together some version of this briefing for the president. Do you think it would approximate?
Yeah, it was written in crayon.
I think it would be close to it, yeah. There's long been a counterproliferation mission, and there have been rehearsals at remote facilities and stuff going back decades. So the rough capabilities are there. The complicating factor here is the fact that the facilities themselves don't have clear ingress and egress. They've been rubbled. That will have to be cleared. That
Ingress, egress?
Getting in and out. Sorry.
Where the fuck doesn't know what ingress and egress
You'd
is?
have to bring in heavy earth-moving equipment, as the report noted. They wouldn't have.
Do they have a bunch of MAGA people watching?
But that does take weeks, and the airlift requirement for that means that you have to find an improved airfield, not the dirt agricultural field that we used for the pilot extraction, which was close to Isfahan. You'd have to seize
Ham, I just saw a news article on Facebook
bring in heavy
about getting a Canadian
transport it there,
citizenship,
which usually requires
and
more
I
heavy
believe I
vehicles
have
to move,
Canadian roots.
and then maintain enough peace and quiet.
So I'm going to look into that. Get a dual
to move
citizenship.
people out. I would disagree with Jason. His estimate was that it would take about 1,000 troops to hold the cordon there. I think that would be true for a one-day, maybe a two-day operation. But if they're there for weeks, which I think is what it would take, every mortar, every missile, every piece of Iranian artillery is going to move in there, and they know exactly what they're shooting at. I think you'd need about 5,000 to 10,000 forces to hold that area.
This is the opposite of the kind of operations that Donald Trump has favored in the past, the in-and-out operations. I mean, this, of course, this is
the article I saw said $55.
Iran, but
and prove you have roots in Canada.
War, Donald Trump
I got to trace my family tree. But I believe my grandfather, who died before I was born,
was the case in Venezuela. It was the case with the previous
was
time
Canadian, French Canadian.
Iran in June of last year. What you're describing now is the total opposite.
Yeah, every American
Can't hurt
president
Charisse,
doesn't
right?
want a protracted presence on the ground. But this would be very hard to do without the acquiescence of the Iranian regime. I think it's more probable that you would see a negotiation or a surrender that would then lead to this kind of operation in the aftermath of a collapse of Iranian security capability. But to do it while the Iranian regime remains functional and active would be
Charisse,
a pretty
did you see the
major
article
operation.
on
It's
Facebook?
not
I think it was
impossible, but it
WNEP
would
that posted
require
it.
a lot of lift, and it would require a lot of forces on the ground. And there would be, everything the Iranians had would be fired into that little pocket that would be held by the Americans.
David Kimball mentioned Kazakhstan, and I do want to remind or inform our viewers of why that could be relevant. There is a precedent of sorts for this high uranium enrichment extraction. It's called Project Ceasefire. The U.S. sent a team into Kazakhstan to secure a large stockpile of highly enriched uranium. This was back in 1994.
Well, it's on there if you have
A joint civilian
Facebook.
military team of 31 Americans entered a remote area of the country in a covert operation. They worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for almost, to the colonel's point, a month. They seized around 600 kilograms of weapons-grade uranium that came from an abandoned Soviet submarine project, and that uranium was repackaged into 448 shipping containers. It was then loaded into 2 military planes, flown to America to be blended down. So, David Kimball, do you think that could be a blueprint for something the U.S. could do in Iran?
Well, technically, it's a blueprint, but we have to remember at the time, Kazakhstan was enthusiastically welcoming the Americans to assist with this operation. That material was a proliferation risk. I mean, that's a very remote part of southeastern Kazakhstan. I've been there. They wanted it removed so that there wasn't a risk that that material was going to be sold to terrorists or third
Good luck.
parties.
Let me know how it works out,
This
Charisse.
is not the case with Iran right now. I mean, Iran wants to protect that 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% U-235. So the best approach, as I said before, I mean, given all of these realities, is for the United States and Iran to negotiate a solution. And I think there is a solution that's available if the two sides give each other the time to negotiate something. This is something where the devil's in the details. I would also add that the IAEA is critical here. Neither side is talking very much about the role of the IAEA. And Director General Grossi has been emphasizing.
So the IAEA, by the way, is the UN's nuclear watchdog, and one of its main missions is to verify, or one of the main things it can do in this context is to verify a country, Iran's in this case, nuclear program.
Exactly. And so, a lot of the information we have had about Iran's nuclear status for years has been due to IAEA inspectors being in Iran. But after the June 2025 strikes, those inspectors had to leave. Iran has not allowed them back into these bombed sites, including the areas where the HEU is, the highly enriched uranium. So this is critical to making sure that we know that the material is all gone. And the other thing I would point out is that this is not the only nuclear capabilities Iran has. They have other stockpiles of low enriched uranium They have other places where
Charisse, your grandparents moved here in the 50s, so you're not really American enough to not get deported by Trump. So,
but there's reason to believe much of that would have been destroyed.
I'll come visit you in a local detention center. All right. Good luck when they deport you to the Congo or wherever.
Industrial scale centrifuge.
Wonder if I can get money for turning you in.
There are other facilities, much more dispersed, that probably still exist, that have not been destroyed, that can produce more centrifuge machines. So if there is material left over in Iran, low enriched, these machines could potentially increase the enrichment level over time. You know, this is why we need to make sure that the IAEA inspectors are back in to make sure that Iran is not pursuing a secret program long after this HEU might be removed one way or another.
So I understand from everything you're telling us
that
the military option is so difficult and risky and uncertain that you keep going back to make a deal, find another way to remove, agree with Iran on how to remove the enrichment or the, beg your pardon, the uranium, or downblend it. Colonel DeRoche, that brings us back to the deal scenario. So far, obviously, a deal hasn't materialized. We know that this president wants to negotiate while keeping the other side under pressure. From a military standpoint, if Donald Trump wants to keep Iran under pressure, wants to maintain a credible threat of overwhelming, imminent American military force, is there any time limitation to that? Because he has a lot of resources devoted to that right now.
Well, the military constraints are less important than the political constraints, which is the upcoming midterm elections. Militarily, there is a cost and there is a damage to the force of keeping ships sailing. We saw, for example, the Gerald Ford, which has been at sea for 11 months, which is an extremely long deployment for an American.
You got to get these kids back to port, man. Got to get them home.
In the ship's laundry, things of that nature, which in hindsight are, nobody plans for accidents, but the longer you remain at sea without a break, the more accidents you get. That's
you're feeding them slop now,
the
too.
Air crews that are deployed, that are living in remote locations, that are on strip alert to resume the bombing campaign. There's always the risk of a lack of attention, of just fatigue leading to more air damages. We saw that 2 of the aerial tankers that we lost were due to a mid-air collision. I think that the investigation will show that fatigue and high operating temp was at least part of that. But all of that is much less important than the political constraints that President Trump does not want to see gasoline at $4 a gallon as summer vacations start. So there is
guess what you're going to have?
Negotiate, but on favorable
$4 a gallon gas.
I will have to
maybe
disagree
$5.
One detail. I think that President Trump's preference is not to have the IAEA conduct inspections, because once they find something, they go back to the UN, action can be confronted. I think he wants to push the Iranians to a point where they blow through another red line, and the United States does it. And then if there's no compliance or fooling around, there's an immediate response, not a referral to the UN where the Russians or the Chinese can frustrate it.
We'll have to leave it at that for today. Thank you very much, Colonel David DeRoche.
How many red lines does Trump get to cross?
Pentagon Director
like, what
of Arabian
the fuck?
Peninsula Affairs, and Daryl Kimball, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Specialist and Executive Director of the Arms Control Association. Thank you very much to both of you. And now that's it from us in the Washington studio. Back to Al Jazeera's Richard Gaisford.
Thanks, Cyril. On the next edition of This Is America,
Luxuries, 3 Mile Island.
Donald Trump's negotiating
It's down by you, isn't it?
Who does he have who could seal the deal, and who do the Iranians trust? That's 18:30 GMT on Monday, 2:30 p.m. East.
The delicate dance that Islamabad
in Pennsylvania. Goodbye.
Itself is an act of war. Now, seizure of an Iranian ship, of course, is an escalation within that act of war.
The foreign minister of Iran exaggerated wildly in a social media post. Our president does that all the time.
Nothing is official until you hear it from us here at the White House, but we feel good about the prospects of a deal.
How can there be such a fundamental discrepancy on such a core issue?
Each side will stick to the deal
only as long as it benefits that side.
This war did start in the middle of negotiations.
They need to agree on principles. President Trump wants this to end. That's going to be very hard.
The top 1% is benefiting. The question is, who might have had some insider information?
Upfront tackles the big issues on Al Jazeera.
I'm Tom McRae. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha with our ongoing coverage of developments out of Iran, the US and Lebanon. Iran's foreign minister is in Islamabad with Pakistan seeking to revive US-Iran talks.
The president has decided to dispatch Special Envoy Witkoff and Jared Kushner back to Islamabad. The Iranians want to talk.
US representatives will leave for Islamabad on Saturday for a possible resumption of talks.
The choice is theirs.
All right, guys, we're going to do one more hour today, and that'll be it. And then I'll see you tomorrow night.
The US Defense Secretary says Tehran has limited time to make a deal, and the naval blockade will remain until that happens. And Israel continues to violate the ceasefire in Lebanon. Hezbollah calls the extension meaningless and presses the Lebanese government to withdraw from talks. US President Donald Trump says Iran will make an offer at resolving the US demands as a second round of talks are expected to kick off in Pakistan. An Iranian delegation led by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has landed in Islamabad. Meanwhile, the White House has confirmed that US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will travel to Islamabad on Saturday for possible resumption of direct talks. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth earlier emphasized that Tehran has an opportunity to make a smart decision.
The president has decided to dispatch Special Envoy Witkoff and Jared Kushner back to Islamabad. The Iranians want to talk. They want to talk in person, and so the president,
Do they?
as I've
You
said,
stupid whore? Because I don't think they do.
all of you always willing to give diplomacy a chance.
Guess we'll find out.
Steve and Jared will be heading to Pakistan tomorrow.
Steve and Jared.
To hear the Iranians
Oof.
out. We hope progress will be made, and we hope that positive developments will come from this meeting, and we will see.
Iran has an important choice, a chance.
Hey,
to make
Whiskey
a deal,
Pete.
a good deal, a wise deal. As part of that effort, the United States has imposed an ironclad blockade that grows more powerful by the day. From the Gulf of Oman to the open ocean, we have all the time in the world. And we're not anxious for a deal.
I saw that, Jay.
We
Welcome.
are live in Islamabad as well as at the White
They already
House,
said
where
fuck
we're
off.
going to begin with Mike Hanna. Mike, Witkoff and Kushner are
It's
being
funny.
sent
It's
back to
Friday.
Islamabad.
It was a
What can you
couple
tell
hours
us,
before the market
about,
closes, and
what
all of a
they'll be
sudden Trump
tasked
makes
with
this
once
announcement.
they get there?
Strange again.
Well, the White House press spokesperson says that she has seen a progress in the last few days. Now, it appears that these are more in the nature of exploratory talks as opposed to the talks that took place and failed last time in the Pakistan capital. On this occasion, the two special envoys are going. However, they will not be joined initially by the Vice President J.D. Vance, who led the last delegation. And the press spokesperson says that both the Vice President and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, will be monitoring the discussions from Washington, and if necessary, they will travel to Islamabad if the talks move to a more substantive level. So it does look as though there is a graded process.
Send in the
place.
couch fucker.
The first set of talks with the envoy and the Iranian representatives on a more exploratory basis. Then, if it gets to substantive issues, the big dog, the Vice President J.D. Vance,
big
will
dog.
be sent in along with the Secretary of State to up the level of the discussions.
Mike, do we know what has changed recently? Are we talking about the same take-it-or-leave-it proposal that was put forward by the US at the last round of talks and that was dismissed by Iran? Or is there an updated proposal that's going to be discussed this time, do we know?
Well, one of the Iranian demands was that there cannot be talks while the U.S. blockade continues, and yet That blockade continues, and in fact, as we heard from the Secretary of Defense,
Stop crying,
it's intensifying, moving
MMA.
to a far wider basis than
Go
just
be a bitch somewhere
blockading
else.
the Strait of Hormuz. And the fact that these exploratory talks are taking place despite this ongoing blockade does appear to be something of a shift in the Iranian position. Whether there are going to be new proposals
learn how to
from
spell,
the
you
US,
stupid
or whether
bot.
it's going to stick to
I know,
its
bots
old
know how to
demands.
spell.
And one must
You're just
remember
stupid, I
that
guess.
the one consistent point of President Trump has been his red line. No development of nuclear weapons. However, even on that, he's not that specific. Is he prepared to allow the Iranians to maintain enriched uranium for peaceful purposes of maintaining their power grid? These are all questions which we will only know the answers to in the next few days, but we do not know whether there is a new agenda in the talk, or indeed whether the Iranian position has shifted, apart from the fact that there is talking going on, despite the fact that the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is still underway.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Mike. Mike Hanna for us at the White House. Osama bin Javed is in the Pakistani capital, Islamabad. He's standing by for us there. Now, we know that Abbas Araghchi's landed there now. Do we know what form this next phase could actually take? What are your Pakistani sources telling you?
Well, he has arrived in Islamabad and he was received by his Pakistani counterpart and the Chief of Pakistani Defense Forces. This has been a fast-moving day of developments. There was a phone call this evening between Abbas Araghchi and Ishaq Dar, the Pakistani foreign minister. Then there was a call between Araghchi and the Pakistani military chief, and that has led to him arriving here. We suspect there's been no confirmation that he is probably going to stay the night before he travels to Oman and onwards to Moscow. There's also been phone calls.
He's not going to be there for the
Pakistani
meeting.
foreign minister and the Russian foreign minister. There's been
Hilarious.
multiple rounds of communication, we believe, between leaders, Pakistani civilian and military leaders, and the United States, which has led to Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff taking off from tomorrow, as has been confirmed by the White House. But again, this is not the beginning of the second round. The second round would begin if it was the same delegation that left the talks after the first round. Remember that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, as we were in Geneva, were not likable by the Iranians, who said they will not negotiate with them. Still not clear whether there is going to be any face-to-face meeting.
Nobody
with them.
likes
So a lot of question marks. But the Pakistani officials that I've been speaking to have been telling me that there is an ongoing communication between all sides. They're insisting that they have to come back to the negotiating table. They're insisting that this is the only way out of this crisis. Now, the situation remains tense as the kinetic operations in the Arabian Sea continue, between each side taking over multiple naval vessels as well as civilian ships. Also, the situation about the American blockade seems to be an impediment going forward. So the Iranians have insisted it is a bilateral visit. They're going to be talking to the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis have not said that it is going to be anything that would pave way for the second round, but they're hopeful that just them arriving, talking to each other, even via intermediaries, is progress. And I asked the Pakistani information minister whether he was hopeful, and he said that because this is ongoing, because the doors have not shut, because each side has not said they are pulling out, this is progress, and they remain hopeful.
Indeed. Thank you so much for that, Osama. Osama bin Javed in Islamabad for us. US General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, says Washington is tracking vessels heading to or moving from Iran, with 2 being seized already.
Both ships, the Tefani, the Majestic X, and their crews remain in U.S. custody. And we will continue to conduct similar maritime interdiction actions and activities in the Pacific and Indian Oceans against Iranian ships and vessels of the Dark Fleet.
Let's take a closer look at the situation in the Strait of Hormuz.
Keep shutting off that oil flow.
Sharif explains.
It's doing wonders for my bank account.
There's a severe maritime
Cost me
crisis
almost
here
$50
at
bucks
the
to
Strait
fill
of
my
Hormuz,
tank
while
yesterday.
it's effectively closed because of
Ridiculous.
2 blockades in place, one by Iran and the other by US. There's intense activity around its waters here, be it in the Gulf of Oman, the Arabian Sea, or further down in the Indian Ocean. Now, this video shows US forces boarding and seizing a vessel in the Indian Ocean. The military says the sanctioned ship was transporting Iranian oil. Now, Central Command says that it's ordered 33 vessels back to port in the first week after it imposed a blockade here on April 13. targeting maritime trade, entering and leaving Iranian ports. In retaliation, we've had Iran's Revolutionary Guard firing and seizing multiple commercial vessels this week, saying the strait is not fully open until the U.S. blockade on its ports is lifted. But President Donald Trump has ordered the military to maintain a strict blockade of the southern ports here. He says he's ordered to
He's a
shoot
stable
and kill
genius.
any small boats that are caught planting sea mines in the Strait of Hormuz. There's also an intense buildup of U.S. Air and naval power in the region, the most intense since 2003. 3 aircraft carrier strike groups, including destroyers and amphibious units, have been deployed near Iran. This is war diplomacy, Trump style, from a blockade, a naval buildup, alongside a ceasefire and negotiations for a deal. But none of it has been able to reopen the strait that has been effectively closed since the start of the war. And while the confrontation is playing out in the Gulf, the impact has been on soaring prices of crude oil, natural gas, and other commodities.
We're joined now by Abbas Aslani, who is a Senior Research Fellow at the Tehran-based Centre for Middle East Strategic Studies. He is in the Iranian capital. Thanks so much for joining us once again, Abbas. This obviously looks like a progress, at the very least, this resumption of potential talks here in Islamabad. What are Iranian officials saying about Abbas Araghchi's visit, and what has he exactly been tasked with here?
Well, Tim, I was talking to a source in Islamabad who was accompanying the Iranian foreign minister. I asked him if there's going to be any negotiations with the U.S. side. He denied the reports on this, and he said that this is going to be an Iranian official meeting with the Pakistani side, trying to follow up on the initiatives Iran previously tabled in during negotiations in Islamabad. And they are going to somehow address those issues and update the Pakistani side on the latest considerations and views of Tehran. And for sure, they might be hearing from Pakistani side on their exchange of messages with the United States. And this could be a kind of renewed discussions on that process, as well as the fragile ceasefire between Iran and the United States, which Tehran has been criticizing the violations of the United States in relations to that, agreement. These are expected to be among Iranian foreign ministers meeting with the Pakistani officials, and there is no Iranian or U.S. negotiations expected in Islamabad. Later, Iranian foreign minister will depart for Oman and Russia in order to continue the discussions.
Okay, we've just heard from Donald Trump saying that Iran plans to make an offer aimed at resolving the U.S. demands. What could that offer potentially look like, do you think?
Well, among the sticking points were the issues of the Strait of Hormuz, and what has been mostly addressed among the media is the nuclear matter. Iran, from the beginning, has been open to any resolution on its nuclear issue, and it also tabled some offers and proposals back in Geneva, and also in the past round of negotiations in Islamabad. Iran was also open to any kind of, let's say, solutions can address the concern of the other side, and also can somehow ensure Iran's rights under the international law, as well as create a transparency. Tehran is saying that it is not seeking nuclear weapons, so that's why it's open to transparency. But the point is that what Tehran has been somehow complaining against is the political shifting by the United States. They have, had several stances regarding this issue. They have been changing the goalposts. And also the point is that they are coming to the table with maximalist demands, which Iran thinks that this hinders the progress at the negotiating table when talking of, nuclear matter issues.
In the past, Iranians have said that they don't want to talk to Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, that there is very little trust with either of those men, given what has happened previously. They want to deal with J.D. Vance. We know that he is standing by to potentially go to Islamabad if progress is made. So how can progress actually
Is
be
he?
made if
Well, he doesn't really have a job, so,
Iranians don't
you know,
trust the men that
I guess he's
have been
waiting.
tasked by the United States to try and push things forward here?
Well, Tom, the issue of distrust toward the United States is generally held in Iran toward the U.S., whether it's J.D. Vance, Steve Witkoff, or Jared Kushner. But because of the past experiences that Iran negotiating with Steve Witkoff, as well as the latter one, also Jared Kushner included, resulted in a military aggression or twice military aggressions against the country. So that's why Iran was saying that, you know, it was somehow waste of time to include them. They didn't engage in good offices, and they didn't maybe communicate what was happening at the negotiating room to the United States. And it seems that, you know, Steve Witkoff, you know, or, you know, even Jared Kushner, they do not have any past background in diplomacy.
No, they're idiots.
So Witkoff is coming with a real estate perspective with this kind of perspective to the table. And this makes, you know, situation a bit difficult, creating a miscommunication and ending in a situation whereby they cannot achieve any outcome in the day. So, and this is added to the layer of distrust from the Iranian side to the U.S. And I think this miscommunication issue, that two sides are coming with different perspectives, one based on, you know, state level and, you know, approach with a real estate, you know, perspective. This doesn't make that happen, so that's been an obstacle from Iran perspective. That's why they insisted that, you know, the Americans better have a different negotiator.
Okay. Donald Trump's also said that US officials are now negotiating with Iran. They're dealing with the people who are in charge now. What do you make of that statement? Who do you think he is referring to there?
You make nothing of that statement. He's out of his fucking mind.
Well, you know, we have been hearing, you know, or seeing contradiction from the U.S. side. On the one side, they are saying that Iran is fractured. They are seeing division in Iranian government. But in the meantime, they have been insisting on negotiating with the same government. So Iran sees this as a kind of negotiating leverage to pressure Tehran, and in order to blame Iran for the lack of, you know, enough progress in the diplomatic track. And on the contrary, what Iran thinks is that the U.S. delegation and negotiating team does not have enough authority, and they say something at the negotiating table, sometimes reaching a preliminary or general understanding on the issues, but when they are back to Washington or following, you know, consultations with Israel, they are maybe manipulated and they change their stance, and this indicates that they do not have enough authority. But for Iran, decisions are made in a transparent framework, and on a decisions of this magnitude, no individual or faction can decide it unilaterally. It can be decided by the Supreme National Security Council, which is comprised of the cabinet members, president, heads of judiciary and parliament, as well as high-ranking military commanders. And finally, any decision in that council is endorsed by the leader. So from Iranian perspective, there's consistency, and it's clear that how a decision is being made. But the Iran at the moment is genuinely, you know, doubtful of the U.S. intentions, and it's not clear that whether the U.S. is seriously seeking that potential deal with Iran or not. And this uncertainty created by the U.S. administration has been heavily clouding the atmosphere of the talks, and that's why Iran says that in addition to that uncertainty, the naval blockade also further complicates the situation, indicating that maybe the U.S. is not ready or willing for that you know, accord with Iran.
Okay, thanks so much, Abbas. We will leave it there for the moment. Abbas Aslani, Senior Research Fellow at the Tehran-based Centre for Middle East Strategic Studies. Thanks again. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says any US-Iran deal must include Tehran's ballistic missile and nuclear capabilities.
Our shared goal is now to
Good luck with
negotiate
that.
a lasting end to the war, and this includes restoring full and permanent freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz without tolls. It is equally clear that any peace agreement will have to address Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program. The events of the last 7 weeks have shown the real
wish, Tom. Do you think
danger
they
that
pay
a
well?
nuclear Iran would pose to the world.
Well, earlier on Friday, US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth criticised EU members for their lack of action on helping to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, describing
Do you
their
spend all
meetings
day on
as
YouTube
silly.
crying and chats?
I know there's a lot of talks. You saw I would call it a silly conference in Europe last week, where they got together and talking about maybe doing something eventually when things are done. Those are not serious efforts yet.
Are you a bot, Tom?
We would welcome that. We would welcome a serious European effort to do something.
No, you
about
can't
this
be a bot. Bots know how to spell.
passage,
Sorry, my bad.
It's their energy capabilities that are most at stake. I think it's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call for countries
Look at
around
this
the world.
drunk.
Either you have capabilities
You
or
think
you
he's
don't.
drunk right
Otherwise,
now?
You're at the behest of a country like Iran, and the only country that can do something about it is the United States military.
Everybody was very clear that the freedom of navigation is non-negotiable, so the Strait of Hormuz has
Well,
to be open
tell
without
Trump.
any tolls, and we need to make efforts for that.
He's got it locked
And of
up tight.
course, as we have the Operation Aspidas and Atalanta actually in the region, the fastest way
Nobody
to
asked what you
put
predicted,
this,
Tom.
coalition of the willing together is to use those missions to ramp them up, to strengthen them with ships and tools capabilities that are needed.
Well, Hezbollah says a ceasefire in Lebanon is meaningless given the continuing attacks by Israel. The Iran-allied group insists diplomacy between Beirut and Israel is an insult to Lebanon. Earlier, Israeli planes struck.
I hope there's further military action. It's great for the channel.
Hezbollah had been operating from there. President Trump announced a 3-week extension to the ceasefire on Thursday.
What about
More
TikTok,
than 1.2
Tom?
million Lebanese have been forced from their homes since the start of March. Since the ceasefire came into effect, some have decided to return. Others are unable to because their villages are occupied, under fire, or destroyed by Israel's army. Al Jazeera's Malcolm Webb spoke to displaced people sheltering in a university in the city of Sidon in southern Lebanon.
The students at this university in the city of Sidon in southern Lebanon were all sent home at the start of last month as hundreds of thousands of people were forced from their homes in the south. This became a displacement shelter. Classrooms have been turned into bedrooms, and in spite of a ceasefire, the people here say it's still not safe to go home. Living between plastic sheets, Salam Assi has just a few comforts from her home, which she says was badly damaged by a blast when an Israeli missile destroyed her neighbour's house. She's not hopeful that the talks between the Israeli and Lebanese governments will help.
I can't go to my house. The glasses of my home is fell down and the door is fell down. I don't have any trust of this country and any country. I want to live in safe only.
Israel's invaded Lebanon 6 times since 1978. All of the classrooms along this corridor are full of families, many of them who've fled their homes several times before. Zahar Assad's 86 years old. She says 20
Trump already
years
said
ago
he's under
in her
no
hometown
pressure.
of Bint Jebel, she survived a month of bombardment by Israel's
So
army.
he's willing to keep
This
the strait
time,
closed for as long as it takes, apparently. He doesn't pay for gas. He doesn't buy his own food. He doesn't give a fuck about the American people or people around the world that are suffering because of this, so what the fuck does he care, right?
And I love it. Ali Najib says he was born in Haifa in 1948, just before Palestine was partitioned to create Israel, forcing his family to flee to the town of Hula in Lebanon. He says him and his wife, Elam Hijazi, have fled repeating cycles of violence all their lives.
We live near the border with Israel, and whenever danger approaches, we're forced to move away. That's why I insist that the Lebanese state must stand with us and protect its people.
Our government is sitting and talking with Netanyahu, with Israel, making agreements built on the blood of those killed, on the destruction of our homes, on everything we built with our own hands, our sweat and effort. Our government wants to weaken us. Anyone whose home was destroyed will not accept this humiliation.
Israel says it targets Hezbollah's fighters and military infrastructure. That's little consolation to the families here who've suffered forced displacement for generations. Malcolm Webb, Al Jazeera, Sidon, southern Lebanon.
Lebanese and US officials say the ceasefire extension in Lebanon will reduce cross-border fire and create space for more diplomatic discussions. But many residents remain unconvinced.
Yesterday, they killed 3 people in Asa, and they killed Amal Khalil in Al-Tayri, and they killed 2 young men, one of them from the Badri family. What is this? Is this a ceasefire, or is this mocking people's intelligence? We need someone to answer us.
We want this to be permanent, not just a week or 3 weeks. We wish that we could have a ceasefire all the time, and that we could end this story. We are people who are tired. We've kept on repeating the same cycle for more than 50 years.
But let's bring you some other news now. Iraq's coordination framework has postponed a meeting to pick the country's next prime minister to Saturday, as they met in Baghdad on Friday. The council is the country's largest and most prominent Shiite political alliance. They had previously elected Nouri al-Maliki for the role on January the 24th. Al-Maliki served as Iraq's prime minister from 2006 to 2014, but US President Donald Trump objected to his nomination and asked Iraq to refrain from electing him. The bloc has until Sunday to choose a new prime minister. Well, Iraq is entering a pivotal political moment.
According to Fox News, breaking, the Justice Department announces it's readopting the firing squad as a means of execution.
Actors are hoping to influence the outcome.
We're going back to the 1800s.
The decision will have consequences that extend well beyond Baghdad. Mahmoud Abdel-Wahid reports on the growing stakes.
The race to nominate Iraq's next prime minister has stalled. Under the constitution, after a president is elected, the largest bloc in parliament has 15 days to select a prime minister. That gives them until April 26. But reaching consensus on a single nominee has been derailed by internal divisions. At the heart of the deadlock is the coordination framework, a powerful Shia alliance. It's facing growing internal disagreement and mounting external pressure. Among the leading contenders is incumbent Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, but his factional opponents are backing former Premier Nouri al-Maliki, who has close ties to Tehran. The debate intensified recently after IRGC Commander Ismail Qa'ani visited Baghdad and held talks with senior Iraqi leaders. For Iran, allied parties and armed groups in Iraq remain a cornerstone of its regional influence. The United States, meanwhile, is pushing for a government with reduced influence from Iran-aligned factions. Donald Trump has warned Washington could revoke support for Baghdad if Maliki returns to power. Beyond Iraq, the regional balance is shifting. The new Syrian government has been turning away from Iran. And in Lebanon, Israel is pushing the government to disarm Hezbollah. Still, Iran insists it retains leverage. Its parliament speaker Mohammad Baqir Qalibaf saying Tehran has new cards to play. All of this is piling the pressure on the Iraqi parliament. For Iraq, the stakes are high. The constitutional clock is ticking. Its pick for the next prime minister could reshape the balance of power in the region as Iran is recalibrating and Washington is pressing Baghdad to elect a government that's detached from Tehran. Mahmoud Abdul-Wahid, Al Jazeera, Baghdad.
At least 3 Palestinians have been killed in an Israeli drone strike on Gaza. The Palestinian Interior Ministry says Israeli warplanes targeted a police patrol in the neighbourhood of Sheikh Radwan, north of Gaza City. Local health officials say 3 people were killed in the attack and several others were injured. The Israeli military confirmed they had conducted a strike in the area, but said they were targeting, quote, Hamas fighters. The funeral of a 15-year-old Palestinian killed by Israeli forces is being held in the occupied West Bank village of Tel. Yusuf Shatya was shot by Israeli forces on Friday during a raid in Nablus. He is at least the 4th Palestinian killed by Israeli settlers or soldiers this week.
I hope, Jimmy. I hope.
Well, Syrian security forces have arrested a former intelligence officer who's the main suspect in a civilian massacre that took place in 2013. Amjad Yusuf was captured outside the city of Hama. He became one of Syria's most wanted fugitives after the fall of Bashar al-Assad in 2024. Authorities say Yusuf and other security officers appeared in a video where dozens of blindfolded men were shot and thrown into a mass grave. Residents say 288 civilians, including 12 children, were slaughtered in the Tadamon neighborhood of Damascus. Well, some of Somalia's most vulnerable children are at risk of losing the opportunity for an education. In displacement camps, children are trying to continue their education, but reduced aid funding is severely disrupting learning programs. Catherine Soy reports from Kismayo.
Yusuf Mohammed has not been paid since last year. An aid agency that supported this group in a camp for displaced people in Kismayo, in southern Somalia, has pulled out due to donor cuts. Now he and 5 other teachers are struggling to keep it afloat. More than 600 students depend on Yusuf and his colleagues also displaced. And more children from across Jubaland continue to arrive.
I'm very sad. Sometimes the students ask difficult questions and I don't have answers. I don't have books or pens to give them. The families cannot afford stationery.
Aid workers have been forced to ration food relief, cut nutrition programs.
Which animals would that be, Tom?
Learning facilities in camps like this one.
78% of Somali children have dropped out of school because of the drought. Hundreds of schools have been closed across the country, and nearly 200,000 children who attended those schools don't have anywhere to go.
Amina Abdullahi recently arrived.
Yeah, of course it needs to stay independent, Jimmy. It's what's best. We'll see how long it takes Warsh to
I would like to see a peaceful
backpedal
Somalia.
on his promise not to be Trump's puppet, and we'll immediately try to lower rates. Thank God he can't do it unilaterally.
In centers like this, displaced children come to
Although I
learn,
wish he could,
talk
because
about their
that
trauma,
would just help
and just
continue
play.
to destroy the
But
economy.
these spaces are often overcrowded, and the need far outweighs the support available.
Our fear is that children, many children might be out of school and miss the opportunity to go to get education, particularly girls who have no role model.
Everyone is doing the best they can to give these young people an education under incredibly difficult circumstances. Catherine Soy, Al Jazeera, Kismayo, Southern Somalia.
Our coverage of the war between the US, Israel and Iran continues after Upfront. Up next.
The latest news as it breaks.
All eyes were on Germany and Italy. They decided that the pact with Israel should remain.
You're probably right, Jimmy.
And in-depth reports.
They're struggling to even find anything, and the situation has been made worse because of the Middle East conflict.
From around the world.
Inside this small therapy room in northern Gaza, therapists are trying to help children find their voices again.
Half hour left, guys. I'm done for the day. I'll be back at 7 p.m. tomorrow night.
Was used as a ruse for war.
Critical debate.
Who betrayed the table? Who attacked the negotiations for the second time? For the third time during the talks we should be attacked? Who is talking about a greater country for itself? Israel, not Iran.
Iran has been a huge supporter of terrorism over the years. I really have to take exception to the idea that Iran is innocent in this.
Inside Story on Al Jazeera.
Are big tech's increasing ties to war and authoritarian governments leading the world into a dystopian future? That conversation's coming up. But first, tensions between the United States and Iran remain high, with a fragile ceasefire in place and uncertainty growing over the future of a diplomatic solution. So who holds the cards and how sustainable is the status quo?
Oh, knock it off, Tom. Immigrants, legal or otherwise, don't commit crimes at any higher rates than anybody else.
To discuss the latest developments
You
on
fucking
the war on
crybaby.
Iran
In fact, they commit crimes at a lower rate than white men do.
On the Line Media and John Fredericks.
How many
John Fredericks radio show.
young innocent men and women in the U.S. are raped and killed by white people every day in the United States of America? You fuck off with your racist bullshit.
President Donald Trump has
You fucking scumbag.
and indefinitely extended the ceasefire with Iran. But at the same time, the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. What comes next?
I mean, it's anyone's guess what comes next. I think this administration is erratic and chaotic, and you have to keep refreshing every 10 minutes.
Fuck him, Jimmy.
To see what
Fuck him.
dangerous delusions
I got no time for that racist bullshit.
I think that, you know, it was just.
It's just another sign of a falling and failing empire.
To kill orders
When you blame everything on
any
immigrants.
Speedboats of the Iranian Navy that are seen trying to put landmines down. That's the latest thing that I read. And the fact that he's right now, actually, he's hosting Israel and Lebanon negotiations at the White House. So this White House administration has a lot on its plate. And I think that it is, again, I use the word delusional.
No, it doesn't.
If
Trump's taking a
thinks that
fucking
it is
nap
going
right
to
now.
win this war against Iran. So far, it has been a quagmire.
I can't wait till they're all dead, Jimmy.
John, what do you say to that?
Well, I think
And their
time
kids.
for the Iranian regime is running out. The blockade is starving them of money. They're losing, we understand, about $500 million a day. They can't go on this way. None of their oil is getting out. We're seizing ships. And now what President Trump just
they've
said
still got
moments
buttloads of ships
ago,
out
as,
there and
Samira
collecting money for
alluded
oil.
to, is
So,
he said, hey, fire on the gunboats.
and they're
sink
used to
them
suffering.
And kill anybody on it. So this thing is going to,
Yeah, we've been. I thought we obliterated their
what
navy.
President Trump has to do
I thought it was all
is
at the bottom of the
rhetoric,
ocean.
Has to start meeting action. And he did that today by saying, you see a boat, they're firing, they're laying a mine, you sink it and you kill them.
That
Bingo.
should have been standard
Done.
operation
As
from
long
day
as
one.
These Iranian ships can't get out of there.
Not
the
2 months later.
IRGC doesn't have any money. They're eventually going to starve themselves to death.
They've got money.
They can't get revenue. They can't ship the oil out to China. The money they're losing every day is going to basically put a stranglehold on the regime, and it's a matter of time before this whole thing collapses. And America can go in there, meet their objective,
I
which
hear
is
you,
to
Jimmy.
extract the uranium that could
Extract.
end up on a nuclear warhead on an ICBM. That's the purpose of this whole thing.
You know, just to pick up off
And Trump isn't going to get any of it.
What John said,
Uh-huh.
Iran is not going to surrender. And I think this is what people don't understand about the
course they're
Iranian
not.
government. It's not going to surrender. Iran is a country that went through an 8-year war of attrition with Saddam Hussein, who was being armed to the teeth by the rest of the world, who suffered chemical weapons. Hundreds of thousands of Iranians were killed. This isn't going to be a cakewalk, and it hasn't. Look, the United States and Israel have bombed more than 13,000 sites in Iran. That didn't make Iran surrender, nor did it make the Iranian people surrender. We have been witness to nightly protests happening in the streets since this war. The impact of this war has actually seen a rallying around the flag effect, which I don't think is what the United States was aiming for. This is a big mistake, and it will get even bigger. I know that John mentioned that Iran is running out of money and, you know, China and all of that. But the fact is that Iran has shown through this war that it is a global economic power and that it can cause a lot of trouble for the rest of the world.
John?
Well, look, one thing I agree with Samira on is the Persian nation has a 2,000-year history, the United States 250 years. So there is a big difference there. I don't think we're looking for surrender. I think what President Trump is looking for is to get the enriched uranium out of there, and we're going to do it one way or the other.
Who would have guessed
because
that
to
bombing
allow
schools
this
and killing children
regime to get the
would have turned the
possibility
people
of a
against us?
nuclear warhead on an
And go figure.
ICBM,
In
where they
hospitals.
can basically terrorize and hold blackmail the entire globe. President Trump is just not going to allow that to happen.
John, hold on. You seem
They weren't terrorizing us.
about the objectives of this war, and I know that
Trump
you
is
speak to
terrorizing
President
us.
Trump regularly, but he contradicts himself, doesn't he, on social media? He's often sent contradictory
Because he has
messages
dementia.
calling for regime change. Then it's not about regime change. What else did he say? We won't be taking the oil. Then 2 days later, the U.S. should take the oil. J.D. Vance is going to Islamabad. Then he's not. Surely that harms U.S. credibility.
Well, the only credibility that matters is meeting our objectives. Look, if you understand President Trump,
What are our
if he
objectives?
says he's going to do something, he's going to do
What
it.
are the
Now,
objectives?
part of what makes him very difficult to predict is his unpredictability, because things change from one day to the next. So who's ever in control of the Iranian regime, which I believe is the IRGC, they don't know from 1 minute to the next what he's going to do. That confusion
I don't think they care.
leads to a better opportunity for the U.S. to meet its objective. Look, patience, the American people here, they're going to need patience. This is not going to be 3 days, 2 weeks, a month. We're going to need patience. And there is comfort in the uncertainty. You have to be able to gain comfort in uncertainty. The American people, the fake news media,
We were told this war would be over in a couple days. Then we were told a couple weeks. It's been 2 months.
We're in a country where
How much patience are we supposed to have? Prices are going through the roof. Gas prices are through the roof. Diesel is through the roof, leading to higher costs across the board for all of us. How much patience are we supposed to have for Trump's lunacy?
See a speedboat, sink it, kill them. End of story. Shoot to kill. That's what's coming next. And
Trump has been saying over and over, we've already sunk their navy. So what the fuck is this fat fuck talking about?
We've already done shoot to kill. We killed 168 school children on the first day of this war. These types of bellicose statements, you know, if John has a window into Trump's mind, maybe there is some method to Trump's madness.
I don't want to look through that window.
I just don't see it. All I see is an administration that is a white Christian nationalist administration that has a drunkard named Pete Hegseth at its helm that makes, you know, proliferations about religiosity and God and the military. And this is a very dangerous, dangerous path that we are down. If you want to talk about facts and truth, the fact is that Rafael Grossi, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, in June of 2025, when the first time America bombed Iran with 2 30,000-pound bombs, where Trump used the word obliterated, I'm quoting him, he said, we've obliterated their nuclear capabilities. And now we're supposed to believe just 6 months later that those nuclear capabilities have ramped up again. This is a total fallacy. This war was launched under the auspices of a lie, and it continues to be fought under the auspices of a lie. Iran was a threat to no one. The point of this war is to decimate Iran's domestic capabilities. Why else would you bomb petrochemical
And distract from the
plants,
Epstein files. Don't forget about that. Our president's a pedophile. So,
steel plants, manufacturers,
still a thing.
Schools, public health centers, universities. What is the point of that? Is that to get rid of the government? Is that to hurt the IRGC? No, that hurts the 17th largest country in the world that is the size of Western Europe. What Israel and America want is a servile client state like they have in Syria and Lebanon. Iran just won't allow it, and that is the problem.
Okay, so let me ask you this, John. You are quite positive about the outcomes, as you've been saying, but the reality is that Iran effectively controls the Strait of Hormuz, which impacts global supply chains and oil. At the same time, the U.S., we've spoken about it, has imposed this blockade on Iran's ports and is planning further economic sanctions. But so there's a standoff here, right? There's a standoff. Who really holds the cards, the U.S. or Iran? It's not a clear victory for the United States under the circumstances.
Well, you know, Samir, there you go again, right? We're trying to debate the facts, and you're calling our Department of War Secretary a drunkard, and you're calling us a white Christian.
Because he is.
You're a Christian. I'm a Catholic. Yeah, that's fine.
We're not a Christian nation, you fat bald fuck. Sit down and shut up.
Look, you got me on the Christian thing. I do believe in our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So you got me on that. But look, here's the bottom line. First of all, as far as the bombings you talked about, you know, there's a word for that. It's called war. See, we're in a war. And when you're in a war, you bomb and people die, right? So we're in a war and these things are going to happen. As far as whether or not they have uranium, they can have a bomb. One of the main thing we've said is, hey, we can end this tomorrow if you let us in, inspect everything, and take out the uranium, the enriched uranium. And they refused to do that. Obviously, they were working on a nuclear bomb. That's why they won't give it up. Otherwise, this thing would already been over. As far as the Straits of Hormuz, look, they don't hold a single card here. As soon as we go in there and we take these islands, that thing's done. We're going to run the Straits. It's over.
This guy's the biggest idiot I've met since Trump.
A client state, nobody's talking
We just take the islands and it's done? What happens once you plant a flag on one of these islands? You think 10,000 drones are going to come down on our troops and kill thousands of them?
Annihilate Paris.
What the fuck?
So we can't
Annihilate Paris. Get the fuck out of here, man. Get the fuck out of here. Warmongering pieces of shit from the people that promised us no new wars. Give me a fucking break.
Reportedly attacked in the past week by Iran in the Strait
fucking
of
joke.
Hormuz. And this is after the U.S. extended the ceasefire. An advisor to Iran's main negotiator said on X, and I quote, "Trump's ceasefire extension means nothing, and that the continuation of the siege is no different from bombardment and must be met with a military response." It does seem as if Iran is no longer interested in talking.
Look, Iran, let's back up a bit here, because Iran was negotiating and they were bombed during those negotiations. That happened in June, and it happened in February, and then again it happened in March. People seem to have a little bit of amnesia about this. It is the United States here that is not the good faith actor, the two real estate agents that are negotiating one of the biggest deals that apparently encompasses the entire world, including Paris. This is the clown show that we're dealing with here. Israel and the United States here are not good faith actors or negotiators. All they want is to be able to control not only the Straits of Hormuz, they want to control Iran's domestic capabilities. The facts are that Iran, unlike Israel, is a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The facts are that Iran and Iranians have a right to nuclear energy, and that is what they have been producing. Now, we hear these statements, particularly from someone like Benjamin Netanyahu, who since 1995 has been saying Iran is months away from a nuclear bomb. We've been doing this for 20 years. When are we going to stop this pretending?
Okay, John, let me ask you this. There's a lot of discussion over whether Israel dragged the United States into this war. I want to just make reference to what the former Secretary of State and somebody who was central to the Iran deal that was negotiated during the Obama era, John Kerry. He recently said that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been lobbying the United States to go to war with Iran. And he said, I quote, "President Obama refused, President Joe Biden refused, President George W. Bush refused. The only president who agreed to this, obviously, is President Trump." So what are your thoughts? Former presidents refused to go to war, and this one didn't.
First of all, nobody cares what John Kerry says. The JCPOA is completely discredited. It did nothing. Benjamin Netanyahu did not talk President Trump into doing anything. Remember, we had
You're
President
full of shit
Trump
and nothing but a shill.
1.0.
Welcome, Mark.
He was equally as able to talk to Netanyahu when he didn't talk him into anything. So nobody's telling Trump what to do here.
That's right,
He's got
Mark.
His own advisors telling him.
Yeah,
what
nobody
is
tells
going
Trump
on.
what to do.
He
Okay.
doesn't want the IRGC and the Iranian regime, the murderous regime, and that's what they are. They're a murderous regime. They've murdered hundreds of thousands of their own people. Look, that's their business. You guys want to stand around while they're hanging
Well, that
a
number
wrestler
just keeps going
in the
up.
public
It
square
might hit the
and
millions.
they're machine gunning down your protesters.
Hundreds of thousands.
If you guys want to tolerate that,
Good Lord.
not my business. I'm not here asking for regime change. I could care less who runs Iran.
You already had regime change, according to Trump. You already had
I care about, I care about them not having a bomb. That's it. Obviously, they were working on it.
Nobody says they were close to a bomb.
The cost of that is incalculable. So President Trump made this decision. So obviously this decision wasn't made today. It was not.
Trump made this decision because he raped children. He doesn't want people talking about it. And he follows Bibi's orders.
Years of this is enough. I'm going to end it. And that's what he's going to do.
Samira, last thoughts.
Just some right-wing loon that has a show, I guess, Mark. It's just all Trump talking points. It's a joke.
Erratic and chaotic.
Just a sad human being.
The world into its dirty little fold. You talked about President Trump 1.0. We didn't have Hexith during 1.0. This is an unhinged Department of War, as it's now called. And the fact is that
why didn't Trump do anything first time around during his first term?
Military commanders
he did shit
in the U.S. administration, and that speaks volumes about what is going on right now.
John?
I mean, now you're going to run our War Department, Samira. I mean, I really like being on with you.
It's Defense Department, you fat fuck.
I mean, you want to decide what military commanders we have in from a foreign land.
It's never happened.
Well, she could probably do a better job at picking military commanders than Hexeth could. So, you know, things.
This is a mistake.
Your favorite word.
It's a massive
Your
mistake.
favorite word is unhinged. Is your favorite word? Let me tell you what's unhinged. When the Iranian government is murdering tens and tens of thousands of their own people.
I thought it was hundreds.
Trump's hillbilly Gestapo is executing American citizens on American streets in broad daylight. So,
these are
fuck off.
People running this country.
They're
all crazy.
There's crazy people running this country, you fat fuck.
They're not going to get one under this president's watch. And there's certainly not going to be billions of dollars being flown in there on pallets so they can then fund.
Want to put money on that? You want to put money on that? Guaranteed. Trump gives them money to postpone their enrichment program. That'll be the end deal.
He said that in January. He said it in June.
Let us finish, John.
These are.
Remember,
Samir, these are bureaucratic globalist organizations.
Okay.
You think we stand around and worry about what the UN says? We could give a rat's tail. What we're interested in, look, if you weren't going to get a bomb.
Yeah, because it's America and no one else, right?
You don't care about anything.
Fucking stupid hillbilly.
You don't care about anything.
This is what's wrong with America. Stupid hillbillies running the show. Too many idiots like him running around.
And whatever stands in your way. That is who you are. That is who you have always been.
Samira Mohyeddin, thank you very much for joining us on Upfront. And John Fredericks, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
The technology firm Palantir has sparked outrage after publishing a 22-point manifesto envisioning a future dominated by autonomous weapons and deeper integration between government and big tech. The doctrine has fueled a broader debate about the growing power of these companies and their ties to authoritarian governments and militaries accused of war crimes. Joining me to discuss this is Yanis Varoufakis, former finance minister of Greece and author of the book Techno-Feudalism, What Killed Capitalism. Yanis, it's a pleasure to have you on Upfront. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you. The pleasure is mine.
So let's talk about this manifesto. You've said that Palantir's recent manifesto openly declares that it will defend a ruling elite, quote, to the death, literally. What was your reaction to the manifesto?
Well, you know, I actually welcomed it because this is the very first time.
I hear you, Mark.
At least to my knowledge.
We're working on it.
A company that is...
and unless he dies, he's here for a couple more years. All we can do is try to put the brakes on him in November.
A weapons manufacturer, a software manufacturer that
That's step one.
Innocent people. Remember the 180 schoolgirls that were killed by a Tomahawk missile at the beginning of this Iran war.
Trump's only got a couple more days, and then he needs congressional approval to keep going with this war. I mean,
like
excursion.
Comes out with a manifesto. It's a blueprint for a
so we'll see what happens.
Diabolical, cowardly new world. So, you know, I welcome
unless he just ignores the law,
to be able
which
to read their own blueprint
would be standard
for a world
operating procedure.
That, then if we allow them to take over control of the world, well, it's our fault. It's humanity's fault. We have a duty of care to ourselves as a species to read through the lines, between the lines, and stop them.
Palantir's AI systems were actually used to fuel Israel's genocide in Gaza and, of course, the US-Israeli war in Iran. Even here in the United States, where I am, it is expanding its partnership and collaborating with US Immigration and Customs Enforcement to spy or to surveil immigrants and actually deport them. So my question is, how do you see the relationship between these technologies and violence, genocide, and potentially fascism? What does that look like?
Well, if you read that manifesto, those 22 points, which of course have been extracted from a whole book that was published by Alexander Karp, the CEO of Palantir, what you'll find is a very audacious attempt to essentially create another ideological justification for the return to weaponized racism. So if you look at the last few points amongst those 22, it is very, very clear. They're arguing in favor of a new hierarchy of cultures. We've seen this before, haven't we? This is exactly what Mein Kampf, Adolf Hitler's textbook, was advocating. A hierarchy of races. They call it different cultures, but that's what they mean. Racial profiling, the idea that some cultures are superior to other cultures. So you have, effectively the essence of the ideology of Nazism and of South African apartheid coming back as a mainstream ideology peddled by one of the companies who.
Now there's a report saying that the USA is spying on the Vatican and the Pope. Of course, because that's the important stuff. Because the Pope said mean things about Donnie.
The New York Stock Exchange than Lockheed Martin that produced the F-35s. So when you put the two together, the burgeoning capitalization, financial power of a company like Palantir, alongside its ideological
right, Mark?
Pursuit on the ideological
joking about Pearl Harbor with the Prime Minister of Japan, yeah. It's genius.
Dimension, then you get an idea of the threat that our species
and he
is facing.
Didn't post a picture of him as Jesus, he posted a picture of himself as a doctor.
Does it not? The manifesto states that US adversaries will not pause to debate about the merits of developing military technologies. They'll just proceed. So where are we now? Are we in the middle of an arms race?
Oh, yes, of course. We've now always been in the middle of the arms race. AI-driven drones, AI-driven weaponry is the next great threat. It is quite interesting that Palantir themselves, in one of these 22 points, clearly state that, the nuclear arms race is over, or actually nuclear arms deterrence is over. And what they are advocating, because they don't make nuclear weapons. If they were making nuclear weapons, they would want to sell more of them. So what they're saying is that the next great conflict, global conflict, will be over AI-driven weaponry, and they may be right about that. They are saying that AI-driven robots are coming. What progressive people, what rational, sensible people should say is, well, maybe we should have an international agreement for limiting this new threat to humanity. What Palantir is saying is, let's go all for it. Let's have more of them. Let's build those machines that kill humanity and then ask questions later. What I'm saying is that this is detrimental to the interest of our species.
Well, on that disconcerting note, let me thank you for joining us here on Upfront. Lots to think about. Yanis Varoufakis, thank you.
Well, thank you.
That's our show. Upfront will be back next week. Goodbye.
All right, thank you everybody for stopping by today. See you again tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. See you then. Bye.